This happened 8 years ago, the summer I graduated college. I didn't have much money, but I wanted to get out and see the world. I saved up enough for a plane ticket to Iceland, rented the cheapest beat-up car I could find, and planned to drive the ring road. My goal was simple: to find places untouched by tourists and take unique photos. I remember it was dusk, and the sky was a strange, haunting shade of pink and purple. I was heading toward a remote town to find a place to stay, but then I saw it. A small road on the navigation system leading to a seemingly magnificent valley. On a whim, I turned onto it without a second thought. The road got progressively narrower and worse, kicking up clouds of dust and making my stomach churn. Before long, the navigation died completely, and my phone lost all signal. A knot of panic began to tighten in my chest, but with the sun gone, I had no choice but to press on. After driving for nearly an hour through the pitch-black wilderness, I finally saw a light. It was a lone cabin, standing proudly in the middle of a vast pasture. Like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline, I floored it, pulling up to the cabin with a sigh of relief. As I was about to get out, the door opened. A kind-faced old woman in a worn sweater smiled warmly and said, "It's so late. What are you doing out here? Come in, it's cold." The woman's name was Ida, and she welcomed me into her home. The cabin was clean and neat, and the fire in the hearth crackled, filling the air with a warm, woody scent. She poured me a hot cup of tea and a bowl of steaming soup. The rich, meaty aroma instantly made me feel at ease. While she bustled around, Ida told me that her husband and son had died years ago, and she had been living alone ever since. She kept bringing them up, saying how much they loved this particular soup, and she kept insisting that I have more. "This soup," she said, "is the best comfort for a lost traveler." I took another spoonful, and a sharp, stinging pain shot through my tongue like a needle. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and my vision blurred. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt like they were filled with lead. The last thing I saw was Ida's smiling face before everything went black. I woke up tied to a rusty old chair in a damp basement. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and rust. I struggled against the rough ropes digging into my wrists and ankles. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked around. The floor was covered in dark, dried bloodstains, and the corners were piled with old farm tools, a rusty scythe, an axe, and other things I couldn't name. There was a small vent in the basement door, and I managed to crane my neck to look through it. I saw Ida talking to a giant figure. It was a scarecrow, stuffed with straw and dressed in tattered clothes. She was stroking its face and saying in a tender, maternal voice, "We found another one, my dear. Look how young he is, his blood is warm." A surge of pure, primal terror gave me a burst of strength. I struggled with all my might, tearing at the ropes until my wrists were raw and bleeding, but they finally loosened. I quietly crept toward the door. It wasn't locked. I burst out of the basement like a startled rabbit, running toward the garage. Inside, several cars were parked, and the trunks of each were slightly ajar. I opened one, and the smell of decay hit me. Inside were piles of luggage, documents, and old clothes. I quickly glanced at the IDs and saw photos of young travelers, just like me, who had come here with a sense of adventure. I scrambled into my car, my hands shaking so badly that it took several tries to get the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, my headlights illuminated the cabin's doorway. Ida stood there, her face still wearing that same kind smile, but in her hand, she held a rusty scythe. She didn't chase me, she just stood there, waving goodbye as if I were a long-lost son going on a journey. I hit the gas, speeding away without looking back, until my phone got signal, and I saw the distant lights of a town. Afterward, I went to the police. But when I took them back, the cabin was gone, leaving only an empty pasture. All the evidence had been wiped clean, as if it had all been a nightmare. But the deep scars on my wrists were a constant reminder that it was all real. I'll never forget Ida's kind face and the sickening smile she gave me as she waved goodbye. I was just one of her many trophies, the only one who had managed to escape. This happened 5 years ago. I was fresh out of college, desperate for a job, and landed a gig working the night shift at a massive wholesale warehouse. It was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The pay was good, but the work was mind-numbingly boring, just driving an electric forklift, moving pallets from the loading docks to their designated racks. The warehouse was huge, maybe 2 football fields long, and for most of the night, I was completely alone. The lighting was dim, with only the main aisles lit. The deeper sections were in near total darkness. Other than the hum of my forklift and the occasional creak of metal from a shifting pallet, the silence was absolute. I quickly got used to it, usually putting on headphones and listening to podcasts to make the time pass faster. That night, I was engrossed in a show about mountain climbers, absent-mindedly navigating my forklift to the farthest corner of the warehouse to drop off the last of my load. As I rounded a corner into Section C, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. Something that shouldn't have been there. I slammed on the brakes, and the forklift came to a halt. I pulled off my headphones and listened. Nothing. Just the distant drone of the exhaust fans. I told myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. Taking a deep breath, I was about to start up the forklift again when a distinct click echoed from somewhere ahead of me. It was a small sound, but it was jarring in the silence. I aimed the forklift's headlights toward the source. In the shadows of the racks, a dark shape darted away. It wasn't a rat, and it wasn't a falling piece of cargo. The way it moved, it looked like a person, but the motion was all wrong, more of a crawl. My heart started pounding, and my palms grew slick with sweat. "Hello!" I yelled, my voice swallowed by the vast, empty space. There was no reply. The shape, startled by my voice, froze. I stared, and it stared back. I couldn't make out any details, just the fact that it was there. After a few seconds, it moved again. Instead of coming toward me, it turned and scuttled away with an unnerving, low-to-the-ground motion, disappearing into the maze of shelves. A chill shot down my spine. I knew I wasn't alone. I grabbed my radio, but there was no signal. My phone was the same. At that moment, I realized I was trapped. I decided I couldn't stay put. I threw the forklift into reverse and sped toward the office. I didn't dare look back, just kept the pedal floored. As I passed one of the aisles, I heard it again. But this time it was close. Right behind me, it seemed. I glanced into the rearview mirror and nearly crashed the forklift. A figure dressed in black was peering out from between the racks, staring at me with a contorted, animal-like posture. It saw me and broke into a twisted grin. Then it started to chase me. It ran impossibly fast, its movements unnatural, almost on all fours, yet with a terrifying speed. I floored the gas, the forklift's engine roaring, echoing through the empty warehouse. It was getting closer. I could hear its ragged breathing and the scraping of its grimy hands on the metal edges of the racks. I screamed in terror, knowing that if it caught me, I was finished. Just as I reached the office doors, my forklift sputtered and died. I frantically turned the key, but it was dead. Panicked, I leaped off and sprinted for the office door. I heard the footfalls behind me, no longer a crawl but a full-on sprint. It was only feet away, and I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck. I burst through the office door, slammed it shut, and shoved a heavy desk in front of it. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, and looked at the blurry glass panel in the door. A distorted face was pressed against it, staring in. The eyes were hollow and emotionless. I called the police. When they arrived, the warehouse was empty. They checked the security cameras, but most were old and broken. They had only a grainy image from the camera outside the office. I tried to explain what happened, the strange crawling, the chase, but they just shook their heads. They said it was probably a trespasser, but I knew better. I knew he was there the whole time, and I just hadn't seen him. I quit the job and never went back. But the memory stayed with me. I'm always looking over my shoulder now, especially at night. I hear strange noises in my house, a clicking on the floorboards, a scraping sound from the closet. I don't dare turn around, because I'm terrified of seeing those hollow eyes again. Once, I came home to find a message scratched into my door. It was the words I had screamed in the warehouse that night. He's not gone. He's just waiting in the shadows, waiting for me to be alone again. This happened about 3 years ago when I was living in a small, single-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. It was the kind of place with a manicured lawn and a porch swing that never got used. My roommate, Sarah, was out of town for the weekend visiting her family, leaving me to enjoy some rare solitude. I remember it was a Saturday night, cold and rainy. I'd ordered a pizza, had a beer, and was settling in for a long binge-watching session of a new show on Netflix. My dog, a big golden retriever named Gus, was asleep on his blanket in the living room, occasionally letting out a soft snore. The only sounds were the rain against the window and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was peaceful, a welcome break from the usual college chaos. The first odd thing happened around 11 p.m. I was in the middle of an episode when I heard a distinct sound from the front door, a gentle, rhythmic tapping. Not like a knock, but a soft, consistent tap, tap, tap. My first thought was that it was Sarah. Maybe she had forgotten her key and was messing with me. I paused the show and called out, "Sarah, you're back early?" There was no reply, just the continued tapping. I walked to the front door, peered through the peephole, but saw nothing but the rain-slicked porch and the empty street. I figured it must have been a branch hitting the door in the wind, a common occurrence. I shrugged, went back to the couch, and hit play on my show. The tapping stopped, but the weirdness didn't. About 30 minutes later, Gus suddenly shot up from his blanket, his ears perked, and let out a low, guttural growl. His tail was tucked between his legs, something he only did when he was genuinely scared. He wasn't barking at a squirrel or a mailman. He was staring intently at the kitchen, his body tense. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. A few moments later, the light in the kitchen flickered once, and then went out completely. I remember the immediate cold feeling in my stomach. The circuit breaker for the kitchen had never tripped before. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and cautiously walked toward the kitchen, my heart pounding. Gus stayed behind me, still growling. I was standing in the dark kitchen, fumbling with my phone's flashlight, when I saw it. On the slick, wooden floor, a single muddy footprint. It was a clear boot print, and it was pointed toward the back door. But the back door was locked and bolted from the inside. I felt a wave of icy terror. The tapping, the light, Gus's reaction, it all clicked into place. I wasn't alone. My eyes scanned the room, and the flashlight beam landed on a reflection in the small window above the sink. Not my own reflection, but a person standing right outside, looking in. The face was obscured by the rain and the darkness, but the eyes were clear. And they were looking directly at me, a wide, unnatural smile on a ghostly white face. I screamed, a raw sound I didn't know I was capable of making. I dropped my phone, and the light went out, plunging the kitchen into complete darkness. I fumbled for the back door's deadbolt, my fingers shaking uncontrollably, but the moment I touched it, I heard a new sound, a soft, wet scraping coming from the small doggy door I had installed for Gus. It was a slow, deliberate sound, as if someone was trying to force their way through. It was impossible. The opening was barely big enough for Gus. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, and heard a new, terrifying sound from the front of the house, the slow, deliberate turning of my front door's doorknob. I managed to get my bearings and bolted. I ran past the living room, grabbing a heavy bookend from a shelf, and sprinted for my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. I barricaded it with the dresser, my heart a jackhammer in my chest. I heard the front door finally give way, the soft click of the lock disengaging. Then a new sound, the voice of a man, clear and calm. "Gus, here boy," he said, imitating my voice perfectly. The imitation was so close, so perfectly timed, it was sickening. Gus, my loyal dog, began whimpering and scratching at my door, a sound of desperate confusion. He thought it was me, but he was calling him. I waited in the dark, clutching the bookend, as the footsteps moved slowly through the house. I could hear them stop, then start again, getting closer to my room. I could hear Gus scratching at my door, the whimpering louder now. And then, a final sound that still haunts my nightmares. My phone, which I had dropped in the kitchen, suddenly lit up with a text message notification. From a number I didn't recognize, a simple message flashed across the screen. "You should have answered the door when I tapped.